Welcome to another episode of Stories That Shape Us with Joanna Daniel. In this story, I'm talking to a young woman who has an amazing story of finding rest as she heals. She is a contributor to the devotional Come See a Man, which we launched on the 8th and 9th of April in Swansea. We're coupling it with our emotional healing conference. If you have not yet registered for the conference for the early bird, we want to encourage you to get in before the early bird tickets are gone as we help get you to the place where this young lady is going to talk about where she got to, how to find rest in as we're healing. But I'm not going to say any more about her story. I'm going to let her tell her story herself. So just join me in welcoming our guest for this episode of Stories That Shape Us. And before I introduce our guest, I just want to thank you for being on this journey with the podcast. Today is day 191, I think. And I know some of you have been around from day one. I appreciate you listening to the stories, making contact, getting our products and services, and registering for the conference. I can't wait to meet you there face to face. So as I mentioned, everyone, we have a special guest. Her name is Sharina, and Sharina has a very important topic that we're going to talk about today. And this is what she writes about in the devotional Come See a Man. It's a topic that we often don't talk about in church, Sharina. It's almost like we're expected to just carry on. This is something I haven't shared. My husband lost his mom. We lost my mother-in-law 2 weeks ago. And while she was ill, it was a very, very brief illness. And while she was on life support, I could hear conversations with people calling him to say, and we won't grieve as those who don't have hope. And I said, well, what does that mean? How do we don't do that? I don't know what they meant. So it's so important that you're talking about this because you're talking about how to find rest. Tell us about how you found rest. What was that journey like?
It's it's been a long journey and it never ends. It's not a journey with a definite destination point you reach and you stay here, you've arrived.
Yeah.
I think I was saying to someone the other day that I think grief is something that will always stay with us for
Mm,
our lives until we stop breathing ourselves.
mm,
Because grief is God's way of letting us know that the world isn't what it was, how He designed it to be. So we have to feel the loss of things because God felt the loss of us in the garden.
yeah.
But finding rest is it's been a struggle because I I don't deal well with authority, and God is very much the authority in my
He's the
life. So
boss.
so He's had to train me and teach me how to listen to Him and how to hear His voice. And
Mm,
even now, I still don't listen to Him.
mm,
Not because I don't want to, but because I'm so used to just doing my own thing and
yeah.
being independent and thinking that I know what's best for me.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you're just the and grieving, healing is such a long, tedious, long-winded, roundabout journey that it's just like, wow, you're on this journey and you just want to say, am I healed yet? It's like when you have kids and you're on the journey
Are
and
we
you
there
keep
yet?
that, are I there yet? You just want to know, are you healed yet? And it's it's not a journey with, like I said, with a definite destination.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many ups and downs and valleys and hilltop moments. It's like I was saying to you just before that today's the anniversary of my father's
Yes.
burial, and 2 weeks ago was the anniversary of my dad's death.
Mm,
And these 2 weeks have been a huge struggle for me because to some people you would think he died in 2019, and to some people would think, well, it's been a while, you should be over it. I think I should be over it, but grief is never ending.
So did you thinking you should be over it? Did you kind of take on what everybody else said? Like, okay, like almost there's a expiry date on grief. Like we should grieve this long and then we're fine. Did you? take that on, like what everybody says, without knowing, because sometimes we internalize those values and we don't know that we're doing that.
I think it's a case of doing things and you don't know because everybody else, you're the one who it's happening to, and everybody else will be like, oh, sorry, but loss of your dad. Oh, sorry to hear if I had passed. And the
Yeah.
next day, they've moved on, and you're just like, but why is the world moving on? And my heart
Mm,
feels like it's
mm,
breaking every
mm,
single day. And
mm-hmm.
you keep on wondering to yourself, is this going to end? Is this feeling ever going to go away?
Mm,
And I'm sorry to say that it never does. It gets
mm,
easier to handle, easier to live with. But
mm.
there are times now when, like, even just before when I mentioned about my dad's funeral, and I thought about it, and literally I couldn't breathe for 5 seconds. I was just like the pain just felt so fresh to me.
It hit you again.
And
Mm,
what's ironic is that I'm currently at the moment I'm designing uh, a funeral program for somebody else at church's mom
mm-hmm.
who just passed away. And I was looking at my dad's funeral program because I designed that as
You
well. And I
designed
was
it.
just like, I couldn't help it. I even as much as it hurts to look back at the pictures, that's all I have of him.
Mm-hmm.
So you have
Mm,
to sometimes you have to take the pain, feel the pain in
yeah.
order to actually heal and move past it and learn to live with it better and function
Learn
with it better.
learn to live with it better. Not deny it. Learn to live with it better, you say. How
Yeah,
did you do that, Sharina? How did you learn how to live with it?
it was it was hard at first because there were times when after my dad's death, like a year after, I wouldn't think about him every single day. And then I felt guilty because I felt like I was forgetting him or like I was ignoring him when I wasn't thinking about him every single day.
Mm,
And then it just, I remember I did an interview with my pastor just after, I can't really remember when I did it with him, but he was talking about grief and he meant when he was talking to me about grief, he mentioned that grief is God's way of telling us that the world isn't what he wanted it to be. And I
right.
just remember thinking, gosh, if I'm grieving for my dad, imagine how much God's grieved for all the people that he's lost over the years,
Okay.
all the heartache that's happened over the years. And I
Right.
think it's that parallel. It's never going to be the same because I've only lost a few people in my life, but God's lost so many billions and billions of people over the years. And he has to look back and think to himself, all this started with one
Mm,
man's
mm,
seeking independence, and that's it.
mm, mm,
One man's downfall, and this has led to a lifetime of pain for God. And then
mm.
when he lost Jesus on the cross, we were we have to remember that when Jesus went to the cross, he was going to the cross on a maybe. It wasn't definite that his sacrifice would be recognized and would be accepted. So he was going to cross on a maybe. And then that period of time when he took on all of our sins and he
Mm,
was cut off from God, God would have been absolutely devastated.
mm,
I mean,
mm.
parents would know. I'm not a parent myself, but parents would know. I'm talking about the moment when you feel like your child is gone or you don't know where your child is.
Yeah.
That moment of panic when you lose touch. And can you imagine if God felt that 10 times more than we could ever dream of or imagine or feeling? Every time something happens to us, God feels it as well. He's crying with us. And it was just, I think for me, it was one thing that was annoying was the fact that I felt like people were just saying, oh, they're sorry for my loss, just out of habitual, like they
Yeah.
felt like that was what they
Yeah.
wanted to say.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it really didn't mean anything to me because at the time I was just going through a daze. I didn't want to speak to anybody. I didn't want to
Mm,
communicate with anybody. I just wanted, if anybody had to be there for me, then they could just say it in silence.
mm, mm. So how did you get to that place? Because it sounds like that question from your pastor had you on this parallel, you were able to have this understanding of God's grief. How did you get to that place? Were you always at that place spiritually where you could view your story through that context? Were you always at that place?
No. I most definitely wasn't. It happened to me, I think, when I finally accepted the grief part and drawing a parallel to God when I was doing Arise, the
Mm.
Arise online course. I think during the pandemic they offered it
I
for
love
free.
their course. Yeah, yeah.
They offered it for free, and I was just like, I was trying to consume every single content, every single moment of it. And there was one when Ty Gibson said that every time every time someone's been raped, someone's been molested, someone's been killed, God's been there. God's been feeling the same pain. And it was in that moment that I realized, my goodness, how can God even, I can't cope with losing my dad. I can't
Mm,
imagine God pain at losing everybody every single day,
mm-hmm,
every minute, like how people died so often. And you're thinking, God's heart is breaking constantly.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it made me
Constantly.
realize that my pain isn't going to last forever because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes once I hold on to that hope,
Yeah,
it's that hope that's kept me going, to be honest.
yeah. So was that a part of the finding rest that you found rest after grief?
It was, I think hope and rest go hand in hand.
Hope and rest.
It's that once you accept that you've got hope,
Mm,
then you can find rest, then you can relax and find peace.
mm-hmm.
It was hope for me was an essential part of it because my dad wasn't a Christian when he died. I don't know what state of mind he was in at the moment when God decided to put him to sleep.
Sure.
But beforehand, my dad was a Christian, but he wasn't. My dad believed in God basically.
Okay.
And the thing is, my dad was always. It's like my uncle always says because we got in contact with my uncle shortly before my dad died, and he would say that every time he called and spoke to my dad, you can't understand a word my dad would say, but as soon as he started talking about Jesus, everything became crystal clear.
Ah,
And he would get into trouble in the nursing home because he kept singing his voice Christian songs and Christian hymns. And sometimes I would just go to the nursing home and I would sit with him and I would just read the Bible to him. But then I'm reading the Bible, he's saying the words, he's reciting it word for word. So I'm just like, what's the point of me reading it to you?
he
I
knew
just
it.
I just want you here with me.
Did some of your rest and hope comes from those experiences of him reading the Bible with him and of him talking about God in the way that he did?
It came from the fact that when he was in the hospital, I remember I prayed and I prayed and I prayed that he would make it right with God before God took him
Right.
because I knew that at that moment, I guess I had a feeling that it was going to be his time. He would come back from this time. So I, instead of praying for God to preserve his life, his mortal life, I prayed for God to preserve his eternal life.
Okay.
And it got to a point when I was praying, I'm praying, and then I just felt peace. And I stopped praying. And sometimes I wonder maybe I wasn't praying for the right thing. Maybe if I prayed to God to preserve his life more, maybe he would still be here. But
There's a part of grief that will do that, isn't it? When we bargain, when we wonder if I wonder if I'd done this differently and if I'd done that differently, would the outcome have been different? And we don't know, like,
it was a case of getting over my guilt
your
and
guilt.
realizing because I held on to so much guilt because I wasn't in person when he died. And then when I asked my mom said that he was asking for me, and I can't imagine how he must have felt being in
Mm,
and then me not being there, knowing that I have always been there whenever he's in hospital for any trivial matter.
you're there.
I've always been there, and he didn't actually know that I had moved to Watford for a
Mm-hmm.
job.
Mm.
So in my head, I'm thinking that he's probably thinking that I just don't love him enough, or I don't want to see him.
And I know you know that that wasn't true, and it's best not to think what people think, and but I'm sure, Sharina, there's a lot of people who can relate to guilt when somebody dies. How did you resolve that guilt in order to find peace?
It was a lot of talking actually addressing my feelings. And I don't know, I talked it through with yourself, I
Mm,
talked it through with a friend of mine, and I talked it through with God.
mm,
And in the end, all three of you asked me the same question. If if I was here, would it have made, do I honestly think that I could have stopped my dad from dying?
mm,
And I had to face the fact that I am not God.
mm.
As much as I want him to be here now, there is a reason why God put him to sleep at that time.
Yeah. So that
And
helped with your guilt.
it helped my guilt, and it also helped the fact that I kept forgetting about the fact that I had been praying for him to be at peace with God, and that God gave me that peaceful feeling that let me know that okay, he's made it right with God. So maybe it is time for him to go home now and just rest.
But we never want that time to come, do we? As children, we never want to say goodbye to our parents. It's just not something that we want to do to anybody that we love, really. But it sounds like you talk through your feelings, you said, to resolve the guilt. Because I know a lot of people get stuck in the guilt phase of grief, and grief becomes complex and it lasts for years and it becomes other things. And when there are other things that accompanies grief, the guilt phase might take longer. But you talked about your feelings, so you were able to acknowledge them, talk about them, and face some truth with them. You told yourself the truth, sounds like.
Unfortunately, but,
Fortunately.
well, it seems a bit unfortunate, but it is better for my growth that I came face to face and I accepted those feelings and the fact that I didn't have any control, which is something
Yeah.
that I've always struggled with. Control is
Control.
always my number one thing. I need to have control over life in general.
Mm, we have less control than we think we do, don't we?
Yep. And there's so much freedom in that, in knowing that you don't actually have that much control over everything, so that when anything goes wrong, it's not actually your fault. When
No,
anything goes right, it's not actually down to you. You just need
no.
to give God praise where praise is due and just keep it pushing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's so important. I want anybody who are listening to, if they are in guilt for anything, it sounds like acceptance is a really crucial part of releasing guilt. I am not in control. We have very little control over anything, much less who whether or not somebody who we love, that we want them to stay, we want them to remain. I see this process happening right now, the bargaining and the guilt and all of that happening, and it's heavy and it's difficult. But allowing yourself, as Sharina said, to feel it, to talk through it, to work through it, it's a way to resolve it. Did you ever get tempted, Sharina? I know sometimes people do, to hang on to guilt longer because it brings some kind of solace, even though it's not good solace, but it's almost like hanging on to it makes me feel like maybe I'm doing something.
It's it's a point where you start feeling that the guilt should be like you should feel guilty, like
Yeah.
it should be a part of you, because if you're not feeling guilty, then it kind of feels like you've moved on and you don't feel like
Uh-huh.
you should move on, or like you're owed the chance at moving on. Like you should always be in pain. You should always
Yeah.
feel that pain and always feel that grief.
Mm.
But it
Isn't
is
that isn't
something.
that something we know that's not the Lord's desire for us at all to be in that place. But here you are saying, I found peace. I found rest after grief. So does moving on feel like, I mean, here you are on the anniversary, what, 4 years later, saying, I choked up today. I still remember, my heart still break. Does finding rest means that you ever forget, or you ever not remember, you stop loving? What does finding rest means for you, and how can that help other people?
Finding rest is accepting the fact that you aren't responsible, that you have never been responsible for that person's life or whatever happened to that person or how that person may have died. And it's finding rest is a way of literally just releasing yourself,
Yeah.
of just going, it's a big breath out, just to know that, just to release yourself and realize that you aren't in control of everything. That God it's God's responsibility. So if God wanted to take my dad at that point in time, then God had to, there must have been a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's finding rest to me now looks like I often I will still look through photos of my dad and me or of my dad, and it's every time I get together with my sister, we always reminisce about the times when we were kids, or when my
Mm.
dad used to wake us up at 5 o'clock in the morning to take us to the beach before we went to school.
Oh, wow.
And when my dad would be that when my dad moved to Antigua and we went to visit him one that was like the longest night of my life because he took us everywhere in Antigua. He was showing us off to all of his friends, but we weren't going by bus or taxi or anything. We were walking everywhere. I was like, this man insane. And he would be charging ahead of us, walking like a kid with boundless amounts of energy. I mean, my sister would just be taking the behind him, just making the way how he was walking.
He was just excited, wasn't he? He
It,
was happy and proud.
it was
Yeah,
just, and it was the things like always remembering him, but always remembering the good times. As well as you have to remember that the bad times as well, because the bad times keep you grounded. It makes you realize that that person wasn't perfect.
right.
But I recognize that my dad was a flawed individual.
Mm.
But the times that I remember that the good times were really good times.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
Mm-hmm.
as a kid, like my dad would tickle me so hard to wet myself when I was just like 5, 6, 7. And that's one of the happiest moments of my life, remembering that time.
Remember those times. So your grief sounds so healthy and balanced, where you are going, he was flawed, he wasn't perfect, we weren't perfect, but so I hold those times and also remember the good times. I'm not trying to not remember those times or not having to deal with those things, but I can remember both.
And I think that's the thing because people see when you see in the news that someone has died, you always say
Mm,
that person was so kind and loving. But then you're thinking to yourself, every person that dies isn't kind and loving and sweet. But then you just like, that's the image that everybody wants to portray of somebody. But when you're dealing with your own grief, you need to remember the good times as well as the bad because you need balance.
need balance.
Otherwise, there are
Yeah.
times that you remember things that are distorted, or sometimes your body, your mind will reject things that are actually bad.
Mm,
But because you've
mm,
sugarcoated it all, your
mm,
mind will just reject them and then
mm. So you didn't sugarcoat yours. You hold him for who he was, the man who you knew, but you were still able to do this appropriate healthy grieving and get out on the other side of what it looks like now, how different it is from when you started to where you are now 3 years later, and you're finding rest where you can have this healthy relationship with it, with your memories, as you move forward.
it's it's I think something that I never realized until when we were doing the groups together was grieving isn't only just death, it's not just loss of someone in your life. So I think dealing with that grief of my dad helped me to deal with my grief now of my situation, of my physical situation, of losing the ability to walk and losing the life that I foresaw myself having.
Mm-hmm.
It's given me the coping skills to actually deal with it better. So as much as grief is a very painful part of life,
Mm-hmm.
it is a part of life, and dealing with it in a healthy way will actually help you deal with other things because you're not just going to lose one person, one thing, and then it's over with. It's going to be a continuous thing of loss as life goes on.
Yeah, you might be grieving more than one thing as life goes on, as you say. And as I share this beautiful book with you, This Too Shall Last, and it's just so beautiful for that when it talks about how to manage those situations that we have that we're dealing with, that is the present, that is the now. How do we live with them? And this is so different, Sharina, because I know that let me just phrase it this way. Let me ask it this way. Your community, in terms of church community, how does that, or how did that help you to manage? You mentioned your loss of mobility and the life that you thought you were going to have and the loss of your dad. How does church help you to manage those two losses?
Honestly, when I lost my dad, church was the last place I wanted to go because I don't deal well with sympathy and pity. And it's hard to differentiate between sympathy and pity and empathy and people
Right.
genuinely who are actually sorry for you. But I don't want your pity. And unless your pity is going to bring back my father, I don't want it.
Tell
I
me the
don't want anything
difference
help.
between, for you, what are the differences for you? How can you differentiate between pity, sympathy, and empathy? What would that look like?
I think for me, empathy was when I first found out that my dad had passed, and I was at work in the offices at BUC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was at work at the office at BUC, and my manager at the time came in, and all she did was just hug me, as opposed to for the whole day. I had pastors and stuff coming in and praying with me, and that's all fine, that's all good and well. But at the time, I've just lost my dad. I don't really want to hear you praying for me and feel your pity and thinking that a prayer is going to make my pain go away
So it
or
felt
going to
like
lessen my
pity.
pain.
It felt like pity. But
And
the hug felt like what? Empathy or
the hug was more like empathy because she just hugged me and held me. And then
right.
afterwards, she just sat with me in silence. She didn't say anything. She just
Mm.
let me cry everything out.
Mm.
So it
Mm.
felt, for me, I felt like when people coming in and praying for me and stuff like that, it just felt like I was consoling them more than they were consoling me.
Right. Not what you needed at the time. Hmm.
Because when other people are dealing with your grief, it becomes very awkward for them
Yeah, sometimes we
because
don't
they
always
don't,
know how to do that though, do we? We don't always know how to manage grief. Yeah, can be
we
tricky.
don't know what to say. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, there is nothing that you can say. There's nothing that you
Nothing.
can do. You can just be like Job's friends in the Bible and just sit with him
Yeah.
for days, hours, whatever it takes. Sometimes you don't need to always fill the room with noise. Silence is also just a good way of consoling somebody as well.
Hmm. Would you have known how to tell them what you need at the time? Would you have even known what you need at that time, that first day? You would
I think if if I'd given into it, I would have just screamed at everybody just to get out.
just leave me, give me silence, give me peace. Right, right.
But
Because
in
I've
that,
sent those text messages that says if there's anything you ever need, and I meant it, I mean it. And for me is, do you want me to come over? Do you want me to come cook and clean? Do you want me to sit in silence with you? I can listen. But now that people are asking me, what do you need, Joe? I'm like, and I said to my friend, I said, I don't know. I don't know what I need. And sometimes what I need, I don't know if I can ask for because I don't know if that's what you mean. Because sometimes what I need is just somebody to go for a walk, to listen, how I am dealing with the impact of my loss and just everything that's happening. So it's grief is so tricky to navigate. But you said some things that maybe we can learn from is pity, empathy, sympathy. So maybe when we're supporting somebody who's experienced a loss, we can think about, okay, so maybe I should ask, or what would be empathy for you? Because I don't want to
that's a
be
good
pity.
just asking somebody what they want instead of just coming around and just talking, and all that person wants is just for you to just be quiet.
Mm.
And I'm a very blunt person, but and it took all of my restraint just not to shout at those people and then to shut up and get out of the office.
So then you were looking after other people's feelings, but your feelings wasn't, but they thought they were looking after your feelings because we have a way of helping that we think is appropriate. I have offered to come around with chocolate and schlur. Like I can sit in silence and we eat chocolate. That's okay. It wasn't what was needed at the time, but that was my awkward way of saying I come and sit with you. But not everybody wants that. Sometimes we can be unsure of what to do when somebody's grieving.
And it's only in hindsight. I think that's why they say hindsight is 2020. Because
Yeah.
when I've gone through it and I had buried my dad, that I look back and I was just like, people are actually offering me comfort in the only that they know how to,
Yeah.
but it wasn't what I needed or wanted.
Yeah. Did it disappear after a while? Did that, those offers, when did it stop? Does it still come? Does people still offer that
It it stopped pretty much the day after.
the day after?
And I'm not even talking about the day after my dad's funeral. It would be like I went to church today, and then the next Sabbath, it would be like nothing's the same.
It
Everything's
wasn't
become new.
mentioned.
It
Mm,
wasn't mentioned
mm,
again.
mm, mm. So this
But
rest that you found, you literally did it without that community. You had to learn how to walk this process and this journey and find rest in Christ. And now you're saying to other people, I've written about the rest that I found and what he has been to me through this process. And that's what you're sharing with others.
it's like when I was when I was learning to heal from this, my come see a man moment was in the fact that I honestly, I could look back through the eyes of Jesus and say, my dad lived a good life. He was
Mm,
79 when he died,
mm,
and he might have spent the last 5 years in a nursing home. But before that, my dad lived all over the Caribbean. He had his kids, he had grandkids. My dad loved his grandkids, loved his grandkids.
mm, mm.
And yeah, he was a flawed individual. He wasn't a perfect dad, but he was my dad. He was perfect to me.
Terrific
And
to
that's
you.
all that really matters.
That's right. That's right. You know, thank you for sharing your story, Sharina. And I know that it's going to help a lot of people because grief is not something that we know how to talk about too well. It's awkward. It's awkward. We don't know how to talk about it. I'm learning how to have conversations about it with my children since I lost a friend 3 years ago, and we talk about it. What would happen to me? What would happen to you? What we would do? How we would be? And I read somewhere, I think it's in the From Scratch book, that the conversation about death is a conversation about living. So how do I want to live? And what are the choices that I want to make? And how do I want to make those choices? So I hope that somebody listening to this can, and as they read your story in Come See your stories in Come See a Man, Sharina wrote 30 of those stories in Come See a Man. I was drawn in from the very first one. Sharina knows I like her writing. I was drawn in from the very first story, Sharina, and I know that they're really short stories, so they're not long. And even though we said 365 days, I reckon that you could sit with that book and finish it in a month, but you will have something to treasure. So the people who register for the early bird booking that ends on the 28th of February gets a copy. Just people who are in the room, though, not the live stream people who are outside of the UK, will get a copy of Come See a Man, where you can read some more of Sharina's stories. And if you are going through this place where you're navigating grief and you're navigating the different phases, we hope that you will able to also find the rest that she has found and is sharing. Thank you, Sharina, for coming. Thank you for sharing with the people. And we look forward to, I know I'll see you soon, but we look forward to seeing our friends at the conference. Take care.